From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I remember when I was first exposed to the significance of the Spanish Empire. I was 6 years old. We went to St. Augustine in Florida, and it was there that I saw my first Spanish fortress, the Castillo de San Marcos. I was fascinated by the architecture and what it represented. The thick walls to fend off attackers, the cannons facing outward to the sea for self-defense, tiny little cubicles where soldiers could sleep at night, how there seemed to be little or no concern for human comfort. I saw the adversity the Spanish conquistadors had endured, and I wondered about why they had been driven to go so far afield from their homes in Spain. I think I began to realize at that time how vast the Spanish Empire had been, how powerful. I was a child of the American Empire then, which was then at its own apex, and it made me realize from a very young age that even awesome power can be fleeting. I attended Cristobal Intermediate School, again, Christopher Columbus, and I later graduated from Balboa High School, named for Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the first European to see the Pacific Ocean from the east, and that's about 500 years ago now. Our home during that time was on the Atlantic side of the isthmus at the entrance to the port of Cristobal. I liked to go out and sit on the seawall overlooking the entrance to the canal. I think all of you probably as children had a place you loved to go and read, and that was my special place to read. I would dangle my feet out over the seawall, and it was right along that coast that Christopher Columbus had sailed in 1502. That was on his fourth voyage of discovery, when he was still desperately hopeful to bring back good news for the sponsor of his trip, Queen Isabella of Castile. So I'd look out across the sea, and I would imagine him there, anchored on Christmas Eve, 1502. And I would think then, too, how did he actually get here? I wondered about the woman who had sent him. She was only a line mentioned, Isabel and Columbus. She'd had some role, but then historians quickly moved on to the story of Christopher Columbus, and Isabel was nothing more than an afterthought. And I started to wonder about who she was. Now, as you can tell, I was very interested in Spanish history. So I read the histories of the conquistadors. I read the stories of Indian rights advocate Bartolomé de las Casas. I read stories about the Inquisition. I read about the Reconquest and the expulsion of the Jews. And I read the many histories of Christopher Columbus. And I was always looking for an explanation of Queen Isabella, and I wasn't finding it anywhere. We traveled to South America on a vacation, and we visited Buenaventura, Colombia, Lima, Peru, and Santiago de Chile. Signs of Spanish dominion were everywhere. My childhood ended. The United States decided to return the Canal Zone to Panama, and we Zonians all had to leave. I went to live on the mainland United States for the first time in my adult life, and everywhere I saw more signs of Isabella's possessions in the New World. I went to California, and there I found San Francisco, San Jose, San Clemente, San Luis Obispo, Los Angeles, and San Diego. I went to New Mexico, and there I found Santa Fe. I went to Mexico, and well, it's Mexico, and everything's in Spanish. Everywhere I went, I wondered about the Spanish colonists, and I wondered about Isabella. And I was amazed, and I became a little embarrassed for my fellow Americans that so many of them seemed to have such limited awareness of the immensity of the impact of Spanish culture on the Americas. Now, this is Christopher Columbus, and you all know about Christopher Columbus. He made 4 trips to the Americas and traveled quite a bit around the Caribbean. This map that I commissioned, though, is a little different, and I'd like to draw your attention to it. One of the things that became apparent to me as I did my research is that, in fact, Isabel was commissioning multiple trips to the New World. In fact, she commissioned 9 separate trips to the New World between 1492 and 1504. And here you can see what the different voyages are and where they went. In fact, she had sent people to explore the entire coast of the Caribbean and all the way down into Brazil. How did she then decide that she could claim all this land for herself? This is how. The man in the picture is Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope. Rodrigo Borgia was his name. He'd been born in Spain, and he was technically a subject of her husband. That meant that he liked to please Isabella and Ferdinand. And so when Columbus came back from his first trip and sent fast horses to Isabel to tell her what he'd found, she quickly sent fast horses to the Vatican and said, "I claim it all for myself." And the Pope said, "Okay." So in fact, all the Americas were proclaimed the possession of Isabel as Queen of Castile and Leon. This is a really interesting structure. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about Isabel is this combination in her of both a person who is closed-minded, which we've seen religiously, and open-minded in other ways. A really interesting combination of things. She was very interested in art, very interested in architecture. And one of the things that's very interesting is that Ferdinand and Isabella, in fact, commissioned the Tempietto in Rome, which is considered one of the masterpieces of early Renaissance architecture. After the Borgias died away, and after Ferdinand and Isabel were gone, the Italians were very irritated that the Spanish had had such an important role in Italy for so long. So they sort of began to erase the history of Spain in Italy. And I think this is one of the fascinating examples. You'll read whole books about Bramante, you'll read a whole book on the Tempietto, and maybe not more than a mention that it was sponsored and funded by Ferdinand and Isabel. And this, does anybody know where this statue is? It's in Washington, D.C. It's here in our own town. It's outside of the Organization of American States. It's a monument to the woman who is the mother of all the shared cultures that are represented in the Organization of American States. And I'd just like to tell you, I'd just like to name for you the members so you get a sense. Remember, they commissioned the statue out there. This is their shared heritage. Argentina, the Bahamas, Barbados, Bolivia, Brazil, at least to some extent Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, Venezuela, and the United States. Not a member of the Organization of American States, but a cultural brother, is the Philippines, which was also a Spanish colony for many years. So that's the thing that's really incredible about this woman, who is only just a name that we heard mentioned in the epic story of Columbus. She exported her culture everywhere. Today, because of Isabella, some 470 million people on the planet speak Spanish as their native language. It's the second most common language on the planet after Mandarin. And about 2 billion are Christian, making it the world's largest religion. Much of that came from Isabella's zeal to spread the faith. The world is much different because this one woman lived.